All right, well, we're excited. Thank you everybody for joining our August meeting. Emmi from the National Park Service, and I think you have a whole crew with you, are going to share some of your results with us today, some of your surveys you've been doing. I think even share some resources, which I'm very excited about. And then at the end, I think it's going to be some time for anybody, if you haven't yet shared those images in that folder, to share some of your images with the group if you want to have some conference on whether or not you think you've been identifying ozone injury appropriately, or just show off some of your garden photos. We'd love to see those as well. But Emmi, I will let you take it away to get us started.
Thanks, Erica. Hi, everybody. I'm Emmi Felker Quinn, and I work in the Air Resources Division of the National Park Service. And today I'm just going to be sharing with you some information about some foliar injury surveys that we've worked on this summer. I'm going to move along at a good clip, but I'm happy to be interrupted if folks have questions. So, I have my Zoom screen up. You can raise your hand or you can interrupt me. Either of those are fine. Let me make sure I can advance my slides. Yes. So I just wanted to tell you a little bit about who the Air Resources Division is. So we're part of the National Office of the National Park Service. We're in the Natural Resources Stewardship and Science Directorate. So we kind of serve as air pollution experts for the whole national park system, which is at this point, about 420 park units, and about 250 or 270 of them manage what we call natural resources, so plants, soil, water, fish. And so our motto in Air Resources is breathe easy, see far, and enjoy nature, to really capture that air quality affects human health of visitors and of staff. It affects how we can appreciate scenic views in the park. And it affects, of course, the ecosystems, the plants, the animals that live in those parks. So that's our kind of ambitious motto. I'm focusing today on ozone. So we monitor ozone in parks, and we also use the national network of ozone monitors to help in parks that don't have in-park monitors. So this map shows ozone monitors that are active across the United States. Triangles show where there's a monitor actually located in a park. Squares show ozone monitors that are near enough to a park that they let us say what is happening with ozone in the park. And of course, the circles are just the National Ozone Network. And so from this, you kind of get a sense looking across the country, ozone monitors tend to be where there are a lot of people, which is good. We know ozone affects people, but can be a little difficult when we're trying to say what's happening out in those wild places where there aren't as many monitors and there aren't as many people. We describe ground level ozone concentrations to protect plants in a different way than we do the ozone concentrations that protect humans. And that's because we know that ozone damage tends to accumulate in plants over the course of a growing season, and that higher ozone concentrations can more heavily affect plants than, say, middling high ozone concentrations. And so we use the W126 metric, which is a sum. It adds up daylight hourly ozone concentrations over about 90 days. And we use the highest W126 value that has occurred during the growing season. And so we characterize those as being in good, fair, or poor condition based on W126 values of 7 or 13, which correspond to effects on sensitive tree seedlings. So at about 7 ppm hours, which is the unit for W126, sensitive tree seedling mass declines by up to 2%. And at 13 ppm hours, sensitive tree seedling mass declines by 4 to 10%. Those numbers were suggested by EPA's review of ozone science and policy under the Clean Air Act that was conducted back in 2014. but that's not a legal standard. So there aren't consequences or policy ways of controlling those or asking that those go down. So this map here actually shows park units and ozone concentrations of the W126. And you can see that there's kind of this cluster in the southwest of parks where ozone is in fair or poor condition for plants. So the thing is that the Clean Air Act sets ozone concentration standards to protect human health based on hourly concentrations. And then there's the W126, which EPA has considered but hasn't said anything to set ozone concentrations that would protect plant growth. That's what I just showed you. But neither the human health standard nor the W126 7 and 13 values relate directly to ozone leaf injury. And so we kind of end up with this question of like, what does leaf injury, when we observe it in the field, tell us about ozone concentration? So for example, I went out with my colleague Jonathan Jernigan a couple years ago, and we found this ozone damaged leaf in Kings Mountain Historical Park in the southeast. And so the question is, what can we, having seen leaf injury, what can we say about ozone concentrations? And what we think we can say when we see leaf injury is that it indicates ozone uptake by actively growing sensitive plants. So it's a bioindicator. It's like the canary in the coal mine. But it doesn't just indicate ozone concentration, it indicates this triad of conditions. So when we see leaf injury, what we know is that means that there are sensitive plants present. So that's like particular plant species, but sometimes even within a particular plant species, only 10% of plants will be vulnerable and will show injury. Leaf injury also indicates that soil moisture and water conditions are kind of favorable enough that the plant is actively growing. It has its little stomata open and it's absorbing ozone. And then also leaf injury, of course, indicates that ozone levels are elevated. So that same EPA review from about 10 years ago suggested that ozone concentrations, W126 values rather, of about 5 to 9 ppm hour would cause leaf injury. But in the southeast, we've seen leaf injury in years where the W126 is 3. And in the southwest, where it's dry and soil moisture might not allow ozone uptake, there have been years where ozone is up to 12 ppm hours, and we don't see leaf injury. And so it can be a bit tough because leaf injury we think is diagnostic when we see it, but when we don't see it, that is not diagnostic that ozone is at safe levels, right? That could just indicate something about plant populations or about moisture conditions. So nonetheless, the Air Resources Division recommends that parks with high ozone levels look for leaf injury. And so, of course, we have the ozone gardens. We've recommended that parks set those up. And the active ozone gardens within the service right now are Great Smoky Mountains National Park, Susan Sachs is on, and Rocky Mountain National Park. And then the other thing we do is we conduct surveys of wild plants for ozone foliar injury. And I want to point out that the Cumberland Piedmont Network surveys, I think, 14 different parks on a rotating schedule. And they have their protocols and their data all online if folks are interested in that. They're in the southeast. So one of the resources that we use when we say to a park, your ozone is high, maybe you should look for foliar injury, is our ozone plant species list, which was assembled by Fish and Wildlife Service and National Park Service in a workshop in 2003. and we've just been kind of updating it as research allows. And that list has kind of two categories that I want to focus on. So there's ozone bioindicator species, and there's ozone sensitive species. Ozone bioindicator species are species that are widely distributed and easy to find, and they develop distinctive injuries in response to ozone. So if you see a particular set of like purple stipple, for example, it's easy to say, oh, that's ozone damage, and not fungal damage or insect damage or some kind of plant disease. And it's important that in these species, the injury symptoms have been confirmed, both observed in the field under sort of natural conditions and in some kind of controlled mesocosm or lab experiment. So we've kind of tested it in a couple different ways. And then for the ozone sensitive species list, those are species where the plant species has demonstrated injury symptoms, but maybe they're non-specific. So I have a picture to the right of that of a willow leaf, and it's a willow species that develops these symptoms in response to ozone, but maybe also in response to drought, maybe also in response to stress. Again, so that's a set of symptoms where when you see it, you can say maybe ozone, but not definitely ozone. And the ozone sensitive species list is also for species where we've seen damage under either field or controlled conditions, but not both. And this list is public and it's online, and I'm happy to share it if folks are interested. And so as we were planning for our summer field season, we were thinking about how we can better support parks that have elevated ozone. And we're interested for now in this cluster in the southwest of parks that have fair condition and poor condition. We've had folks go out and do surveys and not seen anything. And again, the question is, does that mean that those parks have plants that aren't sensitive to ozone? Which would be good, right? Or is it, this is a very dry part of the country. Does the arid conditions and the plant adaptations to those arid conditions kind of prevent ozone damage? Or, are we just looking at the wrong time? And so what we decided to do for this summer is to visit parks in Colorado. So I have a map here of the state of Colorado, and that blue zone in kind of the northeast part of the state is the ozone non-attainment area. So ozone is higher there than EPA's standard for human health, despite efforts over a couple years with policy, with gas formulations to kind of bring ozone down. Ozone remains high. You can see that overlaps with a little pink shape, which is Rocky Mountain National Park. And then moving south, there's fluorescent fossil beds just south of that non-attainment area. And down near Monte Vista is Great Sand Dunes National Park and Preserve. So these are 3 parks that are in poor condition for ozone for vegetation health. Their W126 values are over 13 parts per million hours over the last 5 years. So with a relatively wet summer and relatively low smoke damage, we thought this is the year to go out and see what it looks like. And so we're just going to move from north to south as we talk about these parks. So starting with Rocky Mountain National Park, ozone is pretty high there, 17.1. Remember that our standard for tree seedling growth is about 7 or 13. And the park we know hosts sensitive populations of coneflower. Bob Kohut did a lot of surveys there and published this paper in 2012 about those coneflower. I actually think these might be the parent populations of the coneflower that are sent out to the Ozone Garden Network. And so Lisa and Cody went and visited first week of August and revisited the 14 populations that Bob and his team had last surveyed in 2011. And so when he did these surveys to 2006 to 2010 is what he published on, and then visited again in 2011. He found that at these 14 different populations across the park, they saw ozone damage, and it tended to be fairly low. When Lisa and Cody visited this summer, they saw ozone damage in many of these populations, and some of it actually was fairly high. And so we think that this is a good method to continue to use, and we think probably next summer we'll go out and repeat the exact methods that Bob used to survey these populations. So we are seeing ozone damage this summer, for all that we've had a pretty good air quality summer so far. And then at Florissant Fossil Beds National Monument, ozone again is high. There are 11 plant species that might show ozone damage. Lisa and Cody visited the last week of July, and they identified 9 sites for surveying. But the spring was so hot and so dry up there that they saw plant damage, but just general plant damage. So again, this kind of comes to the point of, like, you can only see ozone damage if the plants are healthy enough in other respects that it can show up. So that might be worth revisiting next year, or maybe in a wetter year. We'll have to see. And then the plan is to visit Great Sand Dunes down in the southern part of the state in late August. Ozone is high there, and the National Park and Preserve is actually right on the edge of a valley with fairly heavy agriculture. So we kind of have air masses that just stay there, and the ozone can kind of really cook for a while. Of course, the park is named after the Great Sand Dunes where not a lot grows, but the preserve also includes the mountains surrounding the dunes. And so there are both alpine meadows and alpine forests that we'll probably survey there. And so one of the things we've been doing as we try and prepare for these surveys is really, we've realized that there aren't a lot of great resources outside of the Ozone Garden Network website for describing what ozone injury looks like in particular species. So we have our list, the Park Service list, but it's really just a list of what the species are and what the references are for those species. And so, particularly because I wasn't able to go out with the team, we kind of had this question of, what does ozone injury look like across these species? And I picked these 3 because you have the coneflower, where you have the stipple, and it'll appear on the top of the leaf, but not the bottom of the leaf if it's ozone damage, right? And then in the middle, you have ponderosa pine. Well, if the damage occurs on the side of the needles that faces the sun, but not the bottom of the sun, it's not ozone damage, it's weather fleck. For ozone damage on ponderosa pine, you want to see it on the sides of the needles that don't face the sun. And then for my last picture here, I have aspen. And with aspen, if it's ozone damage, it'll appear on both sides of the leaf. And so it's kind of like the set of what's diagnostic for one species might be opposite than what it is for another species. And so what we've done is I've put together kind of a general ozone injury guide that describes kind of the different leaf symptoms, some signs that it's ozone rather than another plant stressor, and then just the advice. This is a great time to do ozone damage surveys, because with our phones, we carry around fantastic cameras with us everywhere we go. And so just some advice that if you're not sure whether the symptoms are ozone injury, that you take a picture of the top of the leaf and the bottom of the leaf. And then we've also put together, just for the 3 parks we visited this summer, this guide to both identifying the plants that are ozone sensitive, and also identifying what ozone injury might look like on those species. So sometimes those are written descriptions. Sometimes, like for the alder on the left, there are pictures from older reports that we can put in. And then I put in the coneflower here because coneflower is interesting in that the different subpopulations throughout the United States actually have different foliar injury. And so that's why it's helpful to have both the general guide to what ozone injury might look like and also what's known for this specific plant. And I'm happy to share this guide with anybody who's interested, or the underlying resources. And then I just wanted to kind of make this announcement that the National Atmospheric Deposition Program has this working group that will focus on ozone, and I think they're having their kickoff meeting next week. And then also EPA's Clean Air Scientific Advisory Committee will get a public briefing on the health and environmental effects of ozone on August 29th. So if you're really interested in all the effects that EPA considers in setting standards or in thinking about setting standards, this is a good comprehensive view of kind of what's new in ozone science. And with that, I'll take a break, and I'm happy to answer questions or, share ozone pictures. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Emmy. That was fantastic. And I think those resources are going to be incredible for the network. Right. As you mentioned, we only have a handful of species that we've been able to create the supports for. And folks are always interested in identifying plants that are native to their regions and how we can help them find and identify local species to grow in their gardens, or to keep an eye out if they have a larger garden area that they might want to look around for. So I think that's going to be an incredible resource for the network to tap into. Does anybody have any questions for Emmy?
I have a question, I guess, if you're if you're willing. So I was surprised by the ozone injury on the bottom of the aspen leaf, because in my experience, even looking at aspen, some of the early damage still doesn't go through to the bottom surface of the leaf. So that surprised me. And I guess what I'm wondering is if you've, in your guide, taken into account the severity of the injury, because when injury gets more severe, that tends to be when you see those larger necrotic patches versus earlier stages of injury, which I think typically are, at least to the best knowledge, typically are only on the top surface of the broadleaf species. And I know that it's super difficult to tell. I'll also add that I really appreciate that you're putting together this visual ID, because ozone injury really can look so different on the different plant types. So that's it's been a huge challenge in communicating and even identifying ozone injury. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah, I mean, it's aspen is interesting because I haven't seen a lot of, mostly I'm looking around my neighborhood in Denver, and that's kind of how I tested out. And with aspen, there are definitely some accounts and studies where they see chlorotic mottle on the top of the leaf, and then they see the kind of dark brown dead patches between veins that go on both the top and the bottom of the leaf kind of happening later. But also when we saw some damage on aspen in the botanic gardens this summer, we just saw those necrotic areas. We didn't see the chlorosis. And I don't know if it's like differences between plant sensitivity and plant symptoms, or like indicative of the ozone conditions. But yeah, we're trying to capture that in the general ozone descriptions of, like, sometimes there will be stipple and then chlorosis and then necrosis, or sometimes necrosis occurs first. Like, it's just, Yeah.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, one of the things that we're trying to do with the gardens and the few species that we have is trying to understand how the damage progresses differently on the different plant types. And I would say in my very qualitative observations at this point, the snap bean starts to show, it goes from basically like no injury to severe injury over a very, very short period of time. And it doesn't, whereas something like the coneflower seems to be more of a linear progression of injury where I mean, I don't know if it's linear, but it sort of like increases through time versus that what seems to be more of a threshold response in something like the snap bean that has, it goes from, you can see a few stipples to a week later, the whole leaf is looks brown and half dead. So it's I think it's I wonder if there's a component of that as well that we need to start to think about and consider. But I do know, in my very early days of research, there were different aspen clones that had different levels of sensitivity. So I kind of wonder if that's a piece of it too, just because they do grow clonally. You can have huge stands that is genetically one individual, as I'm sure you know, and so, some of those different individual genotypes might also play into some of those differences as well. Okay.
Definitely. I mean, there's also a part of it that like the W126 is 90 days long. It's really long. And like, we know like with some bean plants that they're particularly sensitive to ozone when they're flowering or fruiting, right? And so like the 90-day W126 isn't going to capture the 5 days when the bean is particularly sensitive. And so there's definitely there's definitely parts of it that we've kind of oversimplified by doing the W126, but it's kind of like in lieu of powerful evidence that it is otherwise, it's kind of the best we have right now.
Yeah, well, and it's a lot easier to quantify W126 because it's just concentration based, right? Versus what is typically called an ozone dose, which accounts for the amount of ozone getting inside the plant leaves due to the stomata. And, you sort of highlighted the difference earlier on in your talk about the drier sites, maybe the ozone damage isn't as high on those sites. And that's one of the challenges with using a concentration-based metric versus a dose-based metric. But the concentration-based metrics are much easier to use because they, we can collect ozone concentrations at the monitor versus having to know the stomatal conductance of the plants. It's trade-offs, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you call me? Sorry.
Yes. Yeah, I saw you have your hand up.
Sorry. Thanks, Emmy. I mean, we know each other well. So, and thanks for the plug for the Thursday meeting we're gonna have with our ozone research group. And I guess I wanted to ask Emmy, I think I might ask you this before, but I can't remember the answer. Like, how are you going to describe the ozone waste, at least the W126 in the areas that you're looking for ozone injury? Like, how many monitors are nearby, things like that?
So that's going to be tricky because at Rocky Mountain National Park there is a ozone monitor right on the park boundary. But I suspect I'll be asking folks in my division who do sort of more of the atmospheric chemistry to, I know they've looked in the park at kind of how ozone can vary through the park, because there's quite a bit of variation in elevation and yeah, so for Rocky Mountain, we have those 14 plant populations, and then we have one measure of ozone, right? And then for fluorescent fossil beds and great sand dunes, we have representative monitors outside the park, but we don't have ozone monitors in park. And so we're just going to have to use our spatial interpolation there.
Yeah, that's understandable. Unless you can get some sort of portable monitor, I know those are expensive out there. If you find a really good spot, I guess I'm talking researchy stuff, but like if you found a really good spot, maybe you could put an ozone monitor near those sites.
I mean, in the Cumberland Piedmont network down in the southeast, they did I think for 12 years, they put portable ozone monitors out any year that they did an ozone foliar injury survey. And those monitors actually tracked the representative monitors around the park pretty well. So they've actually stopped doing those ozone monitors because it's just such a huge expense and hassle for the network, which is based in Kentucky, to run a monitor, down in South Carolina all summer long.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Anybody else have questions for Emmi?
And I'll put my email address in the chat if anybody has a question that they are still formulating, or if you want to know what the online links are for some of those resources.
Yeah, I was curious, are you done, I guess, creating the visual guide of what ozone damage looks like, or is that still a work in progress, and can we share that with this group?
I can share that with the group. I'll put like a big draft thing on it or something, because it does need to go through our internal review service. But yeah, it would be good. It would be good to get y'all's feedback on that, honestly. So.
Yeah, I think this would be a great group to provide some feedback of, oh, this image, what am I really looking for here? I know I could certainly look at it and say, oh, could you highlight this for me in some way if I'm being identifying in one of the photos. So this group definitely has a lot of that knowledge to share.
Yeah, you should have Chris Novak look at it too, because as you know, he did that for his dissertation. And I think he has a lot of photos. I saw him the other day in the EPA office looking through a bunch of old ozone photos and trying to find, I don't know if he was doing that for you or if he was doing that for, I don't know. Anyways, he has a lot of photos from Penn State, I think, from John Skelly.
Yeah, it would be great to get some of those, like some of the ozone injury pictures in particular. They're 20 or 30 years old, and I don't know if it was a camera issue or document production issues, but the colors are off, which of course really affects what you're looking at or what you think you're looking at. So,
Susan, do you have a question or a comment?
Yeah, just a comment, I guess, a question-y comment for Emmi. Just because we've been doing the monitoring in the Smokies for so long, do you have an interest in doing a similar guide for the Southeast? Because we probably have everything you need. It's just a matter of assembling it and getting it to you.
Yeah, that would be great. I think it might be good to connect Susan with you and with Jonathan Jernigan, who does the Cumberland Piedmont network things. And, I think Cumberland Piedmont has something kind of already set up. So it might just be a matter of kind of adding to their existing resources.
I don't need it. I was just thinking for other parks as a resource.
Yeah, that would be great.
Perhaps we can be a host of all of the different parks once, so that it's all in one place, easy for our garden networks, right?
Yeah, that's always nice.
Especially
to know where to go to find the information is great.
Exactly, especially as we grow and get, a really national representation. It'd be good to have resources for everybody.
Oh, and I guess I do have another question. So does anybody know where, or does anybody have like an online training anymore? Because what the NPS used to host that I used to use disappeared, and then Hands on the Land is now gone. And that's where we had moved our online training to. So is there a more of the estimation of the percentage? Because we try to get our folks that are doing that data collection, they used to do that online training before they went out in the field.
We have a limited one just for milkweed and ponderosa pine that was on the Common Learning Portal, but the Common Learning Portal is now turning into DOI talent, so I'm not sure where it is in that pipeline, you know what I mean? And then we do have the underlying images. So if there's a need for it, we could probably rebuild it, the kind of percentage and severity tool. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
also, we have the underlying images because before it disappeared from the NPS website, somebody sent me like the whole huge. So and we did kind of put together a little quick training, but it was so nice when it was online and we could just give people the website, because we do it with school groups. So we have kids that come out, and was a really nice pre-site. But I see that Erica has put a.
So Donica and I have shared the links for our training. It's not so much about percentage, but identifying ozone in the first place. And we do have an activity for young kids to start thinking about percentages that helps them imagine, for younger kids, what could 10% look like spread out over the area of a leaf, right? Which is, if most people when they're thinking about it in a corner or something, and often that's not what that is.
The other thing on our website is if you go to the data entry page, it has images that help to identify sort of the proportion of the leaf that would fall into each of the categories that we identify. And Susan, I know that you and I have talked in the past, and that you're doing things a little bit differently at the garden, which is fine. But maybe this will still be helpful.
Yeah,
in some respects.
Great. Well, thank you.
I'll also say that again, you're collecting data differently, but if you wanted to enter data into our website at any point, then you can download. There's links to download the data as well. So you're more than welcome to use this as a resource for your ozone garden collection as well. And just for others on the call, the differences are because Susan can go out with her, the people who are collecting data in her ozone garden, and identify specific leaves, and so they're tracking ozone damage on specific leaves, whereas the way that our community science project is set up is so that anybody should be able to walk up and look at the ozone gardens and try to help us identify damage. And so it's harder to keep track of specific leaves and the plant structure, and so we've set it up to collect data more generally, not tracking specific leaves through time, just because that's more challenging in this context. So that's one of the main differences, but it's to see both ways. Yeah, thanks for letting us know. I wasn't sure. This is what we did in response to losing hands on the land. So I wasn't who had done that field scope. That's interesting. I'll check it out.
So I know we got a few photos from Jennifer to share of her gardens. They had asked folks if they wanted to share, and I'm happy to share those images for you, Jennifer. She sent them to me, and then if you have any comments you want to make or questions about them, she sent some of both her sensitive and tolerant species. So I will share a screen real quick and show you all what we got there from Yvonne Lake. So these are her tolerant species. Nice garden bed there. Come on, move this one. Wait a second.
So if you look at it, if you can go back a second, Erica.
1 second, and I will do that.
Okay, this is Jennifer. If you can go back. So there was a dramatic difference between the non-sensitive seeds and plants and the sensitive seeds and plants. This is the non-sensitive, and you can see the green beans were planted the very same day, the seeds, bumper crop of green beans. And that is our milkweed. And today it's burst open, the seeds are coming forth from the milkweed, and the coneflower echinacea is doing well. If you zoom in, you can see that there's some bumps on the leaves, but that we don't consider that to be ozone damage. We consider that the bumps on those leaves, yeah, there you go, are insects and environmental. And what's going to be really interesting is that our coal-powered power plant was decommissioned the first of this year. And we thought there would be a dramatic change, but you'll see what Eric is going to show you in just a minute. That's from the non-sensitive.
Oh,
So we had
good.
lots and lots of beans. They were big. They're overripe because nobody's picking them. Okay.
Some good ozone damage there.
Yeah.
Huge difference. And these are from the same day?
They were planted the exact same day, and the pictures are from the same day, yes. And these plants are not doing well either. They're like at the end, and the other ones are still producing. So they're at the end. And the echinacea, so the cut leaf, it's not even sold in our area because it does so poorly. And I wish I had a tape measure of both of them. There's about 2.5 inches to 2 3/4 inches difference in the lengths of the beans that are produced. And the milkweed is a common Ohio milkweed that we have in other gardens that ranges from 5 feet to over 5 feet. And this particular root came from Erica, and it won't even stand up. It at the total, it is 21 inches long. The milkweed, which is further down. I think it's in the next.
I don't know that I got that photo, or
Maybe I didn't. Okay, I'll have to send that to you, but it's very sick looking milkweed. And the other milkweeds in our other gardens, because we manage 11 gardens in the city of Avon Lake, native plants, and the milkweed's thriving, the common Ohio milkweed.
Yeah, I don't think I got that photo, but I would love for you to share it with us later.
I'll send it to you later.
All right. Yeah, there's some big differences there, just visually. Stop that share. Thank you so much for sharing those. And are folks going out to your garden regularly? Are you having a lot of visitors to the garden? You're still muted. You're muted.
Yes, we're having a lot of comments from the public. There's been lifestyle changes. It's exciting, especially since the power plant's in decommissioning zone. Everybody has their ears open to environmental sensitive issues, and this specifically is one of them.
I bet. I don't think I have any other photos, but did anybody else want to share from their network? Any updates or any photos? Okay.
I guess I can just say real quickly, I don't have any photos from the NCAR ozone garden either, but we do have damage this year on both the coneflowers and the milkweed. We still don't have the snap beans and the potatoes planted in our garden, just because of issues with access to our garden space. But I've been surprised that the damage is not as severe this year as it has been in past years. So pleasantly surprised that not as bad because, perhaps our air quality isn't as bad, and I haven't been keeping track of that quite as closely as I would like to. But I also know, just from my own experience, we're not as experiencing quite as many of the really hot and smoke-filled days that we have in past years. So it will be interesting to look at the data more closely, connecting to ozone concentrations.
This is Susanna in Staten Island in New York, and I will just share that we have not planted anything yet because our horticultural team, or botanical garden, our horticultural team we lost about 40% of our staffing, and we're just now having a new horticulturist, and we were going through some shifts in there. So we are right now planning how we're going to implement this for our next growing cycle. So we're planning to, as you had observed at the top of the meeting, that these are not attractive gardens. And so as a botanical garden, this is one of the challenges we're facing. And we do have some of these species that are ozone resistant already on our grounds, interspersed throughout the garden. So our plan is to take some that are the non-tolerant species and put them close to the tolerant species and have them interspersed throughout the site instead of one concentrated garden. And hopefully we'll be able to then guide people's appraisal on the site and have there still be this empirical display of the differences, and provide a guide through passive signage that can be in place. And so that's our current plan for implementation, but we've been seriously delayed by the continuing fallout from COVID in terms of maintaining staffing. So we're having a hard enough time right now just getting our lawns mowed and addressing poison ivy on the ground. So I'm embarrassed to share, but I'm still glad to be here to think about implementation.
No, we're absolutely happy to have all those updates. We know it's been a struggle for many sites, and so we're happy to hear that you're working on a plan for next year, and excited that you're excited to get going next year with your sites. And
Yeah, I may, please, and I may put in another request for some cuttings, but I know our director of horticulture has kept them, and I don't know where they are in terms of propagation because of what had happened with the staffing, and it certainly slipped in his priorities as we're just trying to stay on top of trash and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So as we're coming to the end of our growing season, that'll be part of what we're discussing is how to have these kinds of learning gardens in place and making sure that it's a sustainable element. Thank you. So that's my update.
thank you. And we'll be excited to hear kind of how the integration goes and kind of what that conversation has looked like at your site. I think a lot of new sites that are in a similar situation where they're botanic gardens and they want sites to look beautiful, how can you still engage your gardeners in that conversation? Susan?
Yeah, just a comment. So Susanna, I totally appreciate what you're saying. And the Asheville Botanical Gardens did an ozone garden, and what they did I thought was pretty clever. They set up a community science section of their botanical garden, and they encourage people to use iNaturalist for pollinators in particular, but then they also have their ground level ozone in that. It's a little off. It's not on one of the main paths in the garden, so you kind of have to know where to go, but they do use it with school groups. So I thought that was a pretty clever way of kind of highlighting. And they also have a little bit of a passive air quality monitoring in that area as well.
That's kind of the approach I think that we're going to take, is we have a little space that we have some sovereignty over that has a little less of an aesthetic emphasis, and it doesn't have the same pressures for display. And that is our education garden, and it's within our compost demonstration site. So it already has a little bit of a different mandate than some of our other formal gardens do. But we have two opportunities, which is we have a wetlands, a state map wetlands, which should also give us a platform that is consonant with some of the native species that can be planted there. So we're I need to sit down once he's out of a panic mode and think about how we can look at this from a more holistic way to either provide almost a narrative to encourage people to explore the site in full. And maybe we are concentrating the non-tolerant species in one space, in one ugly little location, and then guiding them to go with a map to go and see where its tolerant counterpart is. But I was just thinking about this when you were saying that one of the beans was like 2 to 3 inches shorter than the other beans. I was thinking that's the kind of stuff that's very hard to really compare if they aren't side by side. So, I think we have a lot of learning to do that might take a couple of growth cycles for us to think about how to have this be the most effective. But I thank you for that input, Susan, because I think that is most of where we're probably going to be active. And then we're also going to support schools, I think, local schools in doing their own versions that they can then not worry so much about the aesthetics.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I really appreciate that you're still here, even though you haven't been able to really do much. And we completely understand. And so thank you for staying engaged in the first place, because I know that that's hard. And I guess just a few other things to add is, one is that not all of the plants look ugly with the ozone damage. Like the cutleaf coneflower, you don't always see the ozone damage really until you look closely at the plant. And the same, I feel like with the milkweed, it doesn't always look super ugly. I would say that is not true with the snap beans, and the potatoes can look pretty bad. So those are two that just to be aware of. But with the coneflower and the milkweed, it might be okay. They might not look, you might not have that problem with people being like, oh, those plants look terrible, why are they growing in the botanical garden? But then the last thing that I wanted to add is it would be really useful if you're willing to continue sharing your experience and setting some of these things up despite some of these challenges with some other gardens, because I think that there are plenty of other people who are running into similar challenges. Erica, I see that Mara has her hand up.
Yes, hello. I just wanted to give a quick update as well from our end. So we did plant everything, and then we hadn't fenced it, so the rabbits came and ate all of our snap beans, and then we fenced it. So a lot of our ozone sensitive species didn't make it. Well, they ate all of them. And then we did have some tolerant species left over. So then it's hard for us to tell anything from it. And we did have our potato plant grow, but then it got really hot and it died. So I guess all in all, just to say, we had some growth. I have been taking pictures, but I'm not sure that they're really useful if it's just one of the ends.
Yeah, thank you, Mara. It's good to know. And I guess I'm curious, will you try to plant these gardens again next year? And it sounds like you learned, okay, we should fence them. And then are there other things that you learned or would do differently?
No, I think one of the species didn't grow at all. So we had the milkweed grow, and we had the snap beans grow, and have the potatoes grow, but no coneflowers. So we struggled with getting those to germinate. So any tips or tricks for those would be nice to know. But that was about it.
Yeah, thank you. And I know, Emmi, you and I had talked about maybe getting some tips from the National Park Service folks who had germinated the plants for us initially. I still haven't been able to connect with them, so it might be nice if we can connect at some point.
Yeah, we're having the same trouble that it sounds like Susanna had, of just the park is at 40% of natural resources staff, and so they're just, it's tough.
Yeah, I understand.
I feel for you, Emmi, seriously.
Well, it looks like Brian was able to get their coneflowers to germinate.
unable to get them to germinate.
Oh, shoot.
Yeah, okay, well, I mean, these are good things to know, and I because our garden at NCAR is so small, I haven't tried germinating the seedlings myself, but I can try, maybe I can try to see if I can get some of them to germinate on my own. And I think I'll have to see, because I remember that I looked up some information about how to get them to germinate. And so if anybody has good recommendations, if anybody has experience with these plants, it would and has tips for germinating them, it could be really helpful. And I'll try to continue looking into that for this next growing season. And, we'll try to, I also know that some of the warmer climates, it's important to get some of the seedlings earlier. And so we'll try to continue to work on that for this year to get some of the seeds and seedlings out as early as we can. At least here in Colorado, the cone flowers are our first plants to come up, and they usually start coming up in April, which is well before the frost, and they can tolerate some of that early frost as well. So, and snow, I guess I should say, it's probably more snow than frost. Yes.
I think the one problem with the roots is I'm often the one sending them, and I'm in Boston, which means I have trouble finding them. They're still buried under snow and other folks are needing to plant them. So if anybody is ever willing to help get roots from one place to another, I can usually help pay for some shipping costs. That would be amazing, Emmy.
Yeah, thanks. And Jennifer, I saw the milkweed milkweed damage is typically on the top surface of the leaf, not all the way through. I think that there are several photos on our training website that you can see, and we did not follow Emmy's suggestion, which is a great one, to take photos of both the top and the bottom surface of the leaf. But maybe we should start doing that a little bit more, just so that people can see what the damage looks like on both. The one thing with the milkweed that I've noticed at our gardens is that the damage often doesn't start on the milkweeds until they're established for a few years. And so the first few years that we had milkweed growing at our garden, we didn't see any ozone damage, even though there was pretty severe ozone damage on a lot of the other plants. And then after 2 to 3 years, we started seeing more ozone damage on the milkweed. And now this year, at least, there's more damage on the milkweed leaves than there are on the coneflower leaves. So.
All right, well, we have reached the 2 o'clock hour, so I don't want to take too much of anybody's time, but this has been a fantastic meeting. Thank you so much, Emmy, for sharing, and I think we all look forward to seeing the resources you've put together, and we'll continue to be in touch. And if anybody ever has more photos that they want to share with us, please do send them our way. You can either continue to use that folder or just email them to Donica and myself. I think that's it for today.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Emmy, for presenting.
Thank you. Bye-bye.